a few mornings ago. I wake up around 5:30, and I woke up around 4, and I got up and I went to the bathroom and I came back to bed, but I had this thought because it was a little too close to when I would usually wake up of, oh, what if I can't get back to sleep, right? And then I'll be stuck. If I wake up at 1 in the morning, I don't worry about it. I figure I'll get back. But I had this kind of nagging feeling of, oh, what if I can't get back to sleep, and then I lose this hour or so. So I'm lying in bed and I'm thinking, I can't sleep. I wish I could get to sleep. And then pretty soon I'm in Japan, and I'm in a temple in Japan, and I'm going about business there. And while I'm there, I'm also thinking, I can't sleep. This is so frustrating. I wish I could get to sleep. I'm losing all this time, and I'm engaging with people in this dream. And I don't think I actually said it out loud to anyone, but the whole time I carried this feeling of, ah, I wish I could solve this problem of getting to sleep. And then when my alarm went off at 5:30, I woke up and I could see the whole thing. Oh, everything that I just experienced, in a sense, was false. I wasn't really in a temple in Japan. I also wasn't struggling to fall asleep. So the story that I was showing myself and the story that I was telling myself, both of which in the dream should have been transparent, right? I should have understood in the reality of the dream that the other thing wasn't a reality. Something should have told me what was going on, but nothing did. So I had this kind of layered experience of delusion for about an hour and a half. And that's my lead in to this wonderful phrase that Dogen uses. It is Muchu Setsumu. Mu means dream. Chu means to be in something or in the middle of something. So Muchu is in a dream or mid dream. Setsu means to explain, and then mu means dream again. So this is explaining a dream within a dream. And this is used, and it would be used in a Buddhist context as a poetic way of talking about delusion. Uh, that that delusion is to be inside a dream and talking about the dream. Is kind of rationalizing the dream or explaining that the dream is real, when in fact it's not. And we have different ways of talking about, with a lot of different ways of talking about not seeing things as they really are. Buddhism is really rich with these images. There's this particularly evocative one because when we hear explaining the dream within the dream, we see our own dream. And so it immediately becomes personal. But we also have a lot of images like um, mistaking a rope for a snake, for example, as an example of how when we're caught up in delusion, all of our actions that follow are misguided. And then we realize it was just a rope, and everything kind of comes into focus. Or these images that have to do with sky and clouds, right? That say that the sky is reality, the sky is what's really there, and the clouds are what obscures it. Right? And that we have this obligation to kind of understand that there's something beyond, there's something more. Dogen was kind of taken with this image of explaining the dream within the dream. but he used it as a place to clarify what he was doing, and he used it as a place to push back. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because there's a lot of variety in Buddhism, and and obviously there's some traditions that are very distinct because they have a particular focal point, for example. So we would say that Nichiren Buddhism is really, really interested um, uh, in the teachings of Nichiren specifically, and in the Lotus Sutra. And so there's a kind of clear defining point. Um, Pure Land Buddhism obviously has this kind of um, focus on Amitabha Buddha and Pure Land. And Zen, in the kind of simple formulation, is the meditation school. And so it's, the image that comes to mind for people is of monks all with these straight backs, and they're all meditating, and that's what they do. And so those aren't necessarily points of disagreement exactly. They're more like points of identity. But then there are some places, some doctrinal places, where there's genuine disagreement uh, throughout history and today. And this idea of explaining the dream within the dream points to one of those, which is, what is the relationship between what we call absolute reality and relative reality? There is not perfect agreement on what this is. So let's talk about that. So Dogen, uh, he didn't want to talk about dream within the dream as a talk about delusion. He said something else. He said, when those imposters who do not truly study Buddhism encounter the teaching of explaining a dream within a dream, they idly suppose it might mean imagining insubstantial dreamlike things which do not exist at all. So seeing things that aren't really there. They suppose that explaining a dream within a dream is just like piling delusion on top of delusion. But it is not this way. When you say the words within delusion is just delusion, you should still thoroughly investigate that the expression delusion on top of delusion is the path in the vast sky, that it is the way of Buddha. So Dogen is planting his flag, in a sense, in this thing that we're calling delusion. He's saying, don't get stuck in rejecting that. Later he says, explaining a dream within a dream is all Buddhas. All Buddhas are wind, rain, water, and fire. They receive these names and they retain those names. Explaining a dream within a dream are the ancient Buddhas, the true Buddhas. In the Lotus Sutra, it says, riding in this precious jeweled vehicle, we immediately arrive at the Buddha's place of the truth. The place of the Buddha to immediately arrive at is within this precious jeweled vehicle. So, there's one understanding of absolute and relative, which says essentially that this relative existence that we're in, that the stuff that we see and smell and taste, that none of it is real. That this is us being inside of a dream. And that what we're losing is the absolute reality, the awakened reality. Right? The relative reality, by definition, is where everything is relative. And so everything is distinct from everything else. And there's a chair over there, and there's a table over there, and there's a person over there. Right? And I am me. And that in absolute reality, none of that is true. That the distinction isn't real. That the connectedness or the oneness is the reality of things. And that we have imposed, or that we have received, a kind of false map of the universe. So everything that we see is a rope that we're mistaking for a snake, essentially. And so all of our activities are the activities of a deluded person. Because our story is wrong, our map is wrong. What Dogen says is, that's not true. He's saying everything around you is real. And you might be deluded at the same time. But it's not that this is false. I think if you're coming into this conversation for the first time, or if you're reading this, it's a little heady and it doesn't feel necessarily like it matters. But it matters so much. It matters in part because I think probably almost all of us at some point have encountered some version of there's a reality that's more real than this one. And Buddhism is going to show you how to see it and how to move within it. There is this thing behind the curtain, and not only has it been hidden from you, but that's the real thing, or that's the more important thing. And if you meditate enough, or if you study enough, if you concentrate in just the right way, the world will reveal itself to you in a new way. Not just brighter or clearer, but some of it will actually kind of wisp away and be revealed as a dream. And we'll finally see what was really there. We'll finally see past the matrix. We'll understand that we've been living out a narrative that is incomplete or just flat out untrue. I had this. I was so excited about this because it only lands as bad news if you aren't being told that you can move beyond it. But if the message is you're in the matrix, but you can get out, ooh, that's really exciting. I could be one of the ones who gets out. I could be Morpheus. That is the promise within a lot of this larger tradition. Dogen isn't alone in pushing back against it, but it's important that he's pushing back against it. It is a critical defining part of what he's saying he's offering. I'm reading from a text by Tairyu Tsunoda. He's a professor at Komazawa University. That's the Soto University in Japan. He says, all things in the universe are the appearance of the shapes of all Buddhas. And these Buddhas are called by the names of these things. So when Dogen says all Buddhas are wind, rain, water, and fire, Dogen is saying wind, rain, water, and fire are Buddhas. That is the revelation of Buddha. That is Buddha right in front of you. Tsunoda Sensei says, this is to say that this very dreamlike real world is the world of all Buddhas. And all of these Buddhas see this dreamlike real world as the world of Buddhas. There's no separation. There's no escape. There's a chapter in Shobo Genzo called Kuge. It means sky flowers or flowers in the sky. And in Kuge, Dogen uses flowers in the sky in the same way that other traditions might use clouds in the sky. That um, in the same way that, you know, if you look at a bright light and then you close your eyes really, really tight, and then you open them up and you see little speckly things in the sky, and it's almost as if there's something there floating in front of you. That's how Dogen talks about these flowers in the sky, that there are these things that appear before us that don't necessarily seem substantial. And flowers in the sky is used by others as another example of delusion, that we that when we look at the world wrong, we see things that aren't necessarily there. Dogen uses the same image, and he says there are flowers in the sky. The flowers in the sky are what we're relating to in the world. The flowers, the sky with flowers in it, is the world. That's the sky that we have to navigate. Our only alternative is to navigate an imaginary one, or one that we draw in our minds to match our image of what it must be, what the true one must be. And now we're really working in the dark. Tsunoda Sensei writes again, in the presently existing real world, Buddhas live as awakened Buddhas, and ordinary people live as ordinary, deluded people. It isn't that there's no awakening and no delusion. It's that awakening and delusion take place in this world that we can see and touch and smell and taste. Awakening doesn't erase any of it. We see the world to the extent of our capability to recognize it. And so, as deluded beings, we don't necessarily see the awakening in this world. But it doesn't mean that what we do see is false. It just means we don't see everything. And so, when we take up Dogen's interpretation of this, of explaining the dream within the dream, we let go of the idea of transcendence. We let go of the idea of a before and an after. And instead, we embrace the don't know part. We embrace looking at the world and saying, I don't know what this is. I know that I see what I see. I also know that I don't see it all. And so there's a curiosity and there's an openness, there's an understanding that my eyes don't necessarily hold all that's in front of them. In that version, awakening is not necessarily having a pair of eyes that sees everything. It might be having a pair of eyes that deeply knows that it doesn't. That moves comfortably in this world where there is everything in front of us and there's more. And I want to leave today with a little thought exercise, which can be a real exercise if we want, which is the practice of lucid dreaming. If you're familiar with it at all, if you've ever experienced it, if you've ever woken up in a dream and recognized, oh, I'm dreaming right now. The other day, I could have woken up in Japan and said, oh, this is a dream. It happens sometimes. If you study lucid dreaming, which is a deep study within Tibetan Buddhism, but has also become a kind of popular thing in the last 50 years or so in the West through a more scientific direction. Whether you're looking at it as a spiritual practice or just a project you're trying to figure out, basically there are two main ways to approach it as a kind of skill that you're developing. One has to do with looking very closely, not just at the world around us, but at the things that are really ordinary and questioning them. So a classic example would be to look at clocks, not digital clocks so much, but analog clocks. In your ordinary life, when you see an analog clock, you would look at the clock, you register, oh, it says 6:32. And then if you were studying lucid dreaming, if this were part of what you were doing, you might look away for a second, and then you'd look back to the clock and you'd check and say, is it still 6:30? Is that what it shows me? And you develop this as a kind of reflex in relationship to clocks. Just kind of double checking the world so that when you're in a dream and you see a clock, it says 6:32, and you look away and you look back and it doesn't say that anymore. Because the matrix is not so great. And the clock was never the point of the dream. So your brain didn't really hardwire the clock, probably. It built other things, and it built the famous person in your dream, and it created the exciting place that you're going. But it didn't worry what time it was. And so you look away, and maybe it isn't even a clock anymore, but maybe now it's 4:30. And then you have this moment, this opportunity to say, oh, something's off. You can do this with all sorts of things. You can do this with text. You read a sign on the wall, really look at it, and then look away and then come back, because our brains just aren't that good at recreating it over and over again. So there's this one way of approaching lucid dreaming, of trying to understand what it is to be within the dream, that's about discernment. It's almost a kind of skepticism. And it becomes a habit in ordinary life. It's a way of saying, where am I now? Where am I now? Where am I now? The other approach, which would be more resonant within this Tibetan Buddhist tradition of lucid dreaming, would be, instead of focusing on the discernment between what is solid and what is not solid, what feels real and what doesn't feel real, would be to take up the mind that everything is a dream. And so you move through your waking life looking at all of that as if you're looking at your mind. This is what it looks like to look at my mind. And adopting that kind of spaciousness, that sense of things not being quite solid, so that when you are in a dream, you approach it with the same mind, except that when you approach it with that mind in the dream accommodates it and starts to move with you. It reveals the dream element more easily, right? You're not approaching the table as if the table is guaranteed to be really a table. So when you get there, the table doesn't have to be a table. And you find that you have this freedom of movement that you didn't have before. These are really two different sides of the same coin. But they're both, I think, really valuable ways of actively investigating this idea of the dream. Again, not the dream as something unreal, but the dream as the world in the way we are experiencing it, understanding that our experience of it is limited and that our experience of it is confused. They're both ways of not taking what is around us for granted, but instead getting really curious about what's happening right now in the small details. Neither of these things comes out of Zen, but I think Dogen would like them both very much. And so I put them out to you in case that's a place where you might like to play. And that's where I'll stop.